there's a reason why this big ugly bill is polling at like 30% in favor and like 65% opposed, because people are saying, "What the hell are you doing?"
Hi there, it's WAMC News Director Ian Pickus, and on this episode of the WAMC News Podcast, we catch up with Massachusetts Congressman Jim McGovern, a Democrat from the 2nd District in office since 1997. Well, Massachusetts Congressman Jim McGovern is known as one of the most progressive voices in the House of Representatives. So how is he dealing with a Republican era in Washington? As you'll hear in our latest conversation, he's working to stop the GOP's bills and finding it frustrating dealing with his colleagues. Okay, here's that conversation.
Hey, I'm happy to be with you.
I hope you don't mind me asking, but this is our first time talking since your family suffered a tragedy back in April, which was the loss of your daughter, and we're very sorry to hear that. How are you holding up?
Yeah, it's the worst thing that could ever happen to anybody. And my daughter Molly was 24 years old, and I miss her terribly. But I appreciate all the well wishes and the nice notes and really kind encounters that I've had with so many people since that. But I think. There's nothing worse that can happen to anybody than losing a child, and so I miss her terribly. But thank you.
It's unfathomable, I'm sure. Has it, changed your perspective on politics in any way, or sort of the daily dramas of Washington?
Yeah. Again, I think of her every moment of the day, and but one of the things about her that I really cherish was the fact that she was not only a free spirit, but somebody who was a champion for the underdog and who, cared about justice and fairness and decency. And so, a lot of what I'm doing now is inspired by her example. And again, I think of her all the time.
Well, we were all thinking of you and your family when we heard the news, so just keep that in mind, and I'm sure that's true of your constituents, too, in the 2nd District. So to sort of less weighty things, although also important, it's our first time speaking since the big, beautiful bill, so-called passed the House by one vote. You were a vociferous no. How come?
Because it's a terrible bill. It's not a big, beautiful bill. It's a big, ugly bill. I mean, we throw 16 million people off of health care. It will throw millions and millions of people will lose their nutrition and food benefits because of the cuts in SNAP. I mean, it's a bill that doesn't represent my values or the values of the majority of the people that I represent. It's going to do great harm to my constituency and to this country. They're making all these cuts while at the same time giving a tax break to billionaires. I mean, I'm hard pressed to find anybody who can explain to me why Elon Musk needs another tax break. Those in the middle, those struggling to get in the middle. Yeah, I get that. But it's millionaires and billionaires. Why the hell are we, giving them tax breaks? And by the way, this would add $3.3 trillion to the deficit. So this is a terrible bill. And it was put together quickly, not a lot of thought. We will probably come back to the House maybe next week. We're told that we're not going to have a 4th of July break, potentially, because Trump wants to be able to sign this on the 4th of July. But I'm going to do everything I can to defeat it. Again, it doesn't represent my values, and I don't think it represents the values of the people I represent.
If I could summarize what I've heard as the Republican argument in favor of the tax breaks package, it would be something along the lines of, it stimulates economic activity and that, will eventually redound to everyone's benefit. I take it you don't buy that.
There's no evidence that giving billionaires more tax cuts will trickle down to help average people, or that they will take that money and reinvest it in the economy. A better use of that money would be to actually directly invest it into the economy, helping to create more jobs, helping to rebuild our infrastructure, helping make it easier for young people to afford a college education. I mean, those are the things that we ought to be focused on. Also, on making sure that everybody has access to health care. When you cut nutrition benefits, like you cut SNAP, which, by the way, is the benefit is on average about $2 per person per meal. That's it. Majority of people on the program are children or seniors, and of those who are able-bodied, the majority of people work. But that's what the benefit is. But when you start taking away people's nutrition benefits, you know what? That doesn't save you money, because that means that some senior citizen will end up taking their medication on an empty stomach and end up in an emergency room. It means that people won't have access to nutritious food. They're more likely to get a chronic illness that will last their entire lifetime. And kids who go to school hungry don't learn. Workers who go to work who are missing meals or less productive. All of that is a cost. And the inability of Republicans and this guy in the White House to be able to make those connections is really stunning to me. Donald Trump doesn't have to worry about, the affordability of food or whether he's going to have enough to eat, or doesn't have to worry about his health care or any of that kind of stuff. He lives in lifestyles of the rich and famous. But the millions and millions of people in this country are just working and struggling just to get by. And I think, the focus ought to be on how do we improve the quality of life for average people in this country. That's where our focus ought to be, not on enriching those who are already rich.
Am I remembering correctly, because SNAP is a passion of yours, of course, and something that you work on very closely. You lived on the SNAP benefit for a while to make a demonstration of what it actually entails. And I remember your takeaway was pretty stark.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, you have to plan for how do I afford food for the week? And again, it's on average about $2 per person per meal. I'm talking to you from the United States Capitol. There's not a place anywhere on the Capitol campus where I can buy a cup of coffee for $2. And yet we expect people to be able to, sustain themselves, to feed themselves and their families on this kind of meager benefit. And now Congress is talking about cutting it. I mean, the cuts for SNAP and the cuts to Medicaid, and there'll also be cuts to Medicare, by the way, but the cuts to SNAP and Medicaid are the biggest cuts to nutrition and health care in our history. And again, I don't know how that helps our country. I know it will hurt people, but but they're doing this to basically offset the cost of tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. It's like it's unreal, and there's a reason why this big ugly bill is polling at like 30% in favor and like 65% opposed, because people are saying, "What the hell are you doing in Washington? Why are you doing this? You're supposed to be helping us, and what you're doing is you're helping people who are big contributors, and you're not helping regular people." So again, I don't know how this will turn out in the coming days or weeks, but it's a bad deal for the United States, and I hope we can defeat it.
Things are moving pretty quickly as we speak, but earlier we were talking about the Senate version of the domestic agenda package that the House passed by one vote back in May. I think there was some conjecture about some Republicans in the Senate rolling back some of the more aggressive changes in the bill. People like Josh Hawley were talking about cuts to social programs and so on. So are you hopeful that the Senate bill would be different in any way?
Well, in the case of Medicaid cuts, the Senate bill is worse. So what we're going to get back here in the House are deeper cuts in Medicaid. And in terms of SNAP, there's like very little difference. Again, it's going to be devastating to millions of people in this country. Yeah, and there's 100 other things in this bill that are going to hurt my constituents and people across the country. So the Senate bill is not better. It's just as bad, and in some cases worse than what we sent over from the House.
What do you say to the argument that, the American people decided to give Republicans control of Washington in November? They gave them the Senate, the House, and the White House. And it's not a total mystery that a bill like this would emerge from, a party that was promoting Project 2025 and things like that.
Yeah, so I don't think people voted based on Project 2025. This is my interpretation of the last election, is that, I think a lot of people voted for Republicans or voted for Trump, or a lot of people stayed home because they didn't think it mattered whether Republicans or Democrats were in charge, or whether we had, Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, because their lives didn't change for the better under, Democrats or Republicans or Democrats. And I think one of the challenges for Democrats is that, as we fight Trump and as we fight some of these extreme proposals, we have to show people, and we have to prove to people that we have some ideas and some policies that will actually make a difference in their lives, that will lower the cost of living for people, that will make, groceries more affordable, that will enable young people to be able to purchase a home, will help make college education more affordable, that we're investing in communities to help improve safety and the quality of transportation in communities. People want their lives to be easier, not more expensive, not more complicated. And so I don't think people voted to give billionaires a tax cut. I don't think people voted to cut Medicaid or to throw 16 million people off of health care, or to cut Medicare, or to take food away from hungry families. I don't think that's what the election was about. I think people were just like, whatever. So as we're fighting against some of these things, we need to remind people that what we're for, because I think that's important.
How much of that comes down to having a really good candidate at the top of the ticket? I mean, I think it's fair to say that the questions over President Biden's ability to do another term really hurt the Democrats in the last race.
Look, in retrospect, Joe Biden should have gotten out earlier, and should have decided that he was not going to run for re-election. Look, I like Joe Biden. I think he did a good job as president, but I think it's clear that he should not have run for a second term. Had he made that decision earlier, had there been a primary, and even if Kamala Harris had emerged as the winner, I think she would have been stronger. This election was very, very close, notwithstanding what Trump says every day, but it was very, very close. And I think if she had more time, I think she might have emerged as the victor. I think my critique of her campaign was that, again, she needed to focus more on bread and butter issues, on everyday issues that people, grapple with. And I think had she done that, that might have made a difference.
You've been talking about Democrats who are trying to stop the Republican advance in Washington on a number of fronts. There was actually an impeachment vote the other day over the use of military force, and that was defeated. Many Democrats joined with Republicans against the measure. What was your view of it?
Well, I voted to not block a debate on impeachment. Look, I think this president has committed a number of illegal acts, and I think my criticism of Congress is that we're not holding him to account. He's unilaterally freezing and cutting programs that Congress authorized and appropriated. That's illegal. The way this system works is when Congress appropriates money, he has to, disperse it. And if he doesn't like that, he has to come back to Congress and ask us to cut it. So, and courts are now deciding in Congress's favor, but this is a lengthy and drawn-out process. I think his bombing of Iran without congressional approval, going to war with Iran, is unconstitutional. But I'm not going to vote, to deny the ability of Congress to deliberate on issues, whether it's impeachment or anything else. But I think this president is unfit for office. I think he has committed a number of illegal acts, and when this is all said and done, history will look back and also see this enormous amount of corruption that is happening in this administration, where he and others are enriching themselves by virtue of their positions of power. And the Trump family is getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier because of Donald Trump every single day. And the corruption is blatant, and I think he's the most corrupt president since Richard Nixon, and he makes Nixon look like a Boy Scout. So but any event, Donald Trump is not going to be impeached with a Republican-controlled Congress. Donald Trump will not be held to account on anything in a Republican-controlled Congress. This Republican-controlled Congress has ceded Congress's constitutional authority to this president because they're afraid of him. Trump's a bully, and they constantly cave. And that's not the way the system is supposed to work, no matter who's in power.
Do your Republican colleagues in the House have a different view of him than what they say publicly?
Yeah, I've had many conversations with Republicans who have told me they think he's wrong. They think he's is unhinged. They complain about him all the time. I've had a lot of conversations recently from a lot of moderate Republicans who think that this big, ugly bill that he's pushing is going to hurt their constituents, that it's disgusting, that he's making these deep cuts in programs like Medicaid and Medicare and SNAP. And but I've said to them, I had a conversation just yesterday with one of them who was complaining about how awful all this is. I said, you know what? I don't want to hear your confession. I'm not a priest. I don't want to hear your confession. I want your vote. So if you think that this thing is so awful, then have the guts and the courage to vote no. But you always cave. So it doesn't, I'm not going to give you absolution for telling me that, all the things I'm saying about how awful this is correct. And then you go out and vote yes. No, you're in Congress to vote your conscience, to vote what's in the best interest of your constituents. And if you're not going to do that, then I don't want to hear about it. And that's the frustration of this moment. I think there were a lot of Republicans who know this is awful, but they were afraid of Trump. He's threatened them. He's told them that if they don't vote with him, he'll get a primary challenge to them, and they're all afraid they'll lose their seats. And my view is it's not worth being in Congress if you're voting against your conscience every single day of the week. Why would you want to be here? What joy do you get out of being here and voting the wrong way all the time? So we'll see what happens. A lot of Republicans are drawing lines in the sand. If we don't do this, I'm going to vote no. But they've done that before. And then when push comes to shove, they cave. We'll see whether this time is any different. I hope it is. I hope some of them, will do the right thing because at the end of the day, they're here to serve their constituents, not to get reelected.
I wanted to ask you, because you're seen, Congressman, as a very progressive leader in the Congress, what you thought of the New York City mayoral primary result the other day.
Yeah, I thought it was a fascinating result, and I'm not surprised by the result because at the end of the day, people want change. They want a fighter. They want someone who's going to be on their side. And I think Mamdani came across as more of a fighter for regular people than Cuomo. Also, I have a lot of friends in New York who told me that Cuomo didn't campaign, that basically he just had paid media running nonstop. And people, people want to see the candidate. They want to be able to ask questions of a candidate. They want to see a candidate, knocking on doors and shaking hands and doing town halls, and Cuomo didn't do that. So I think the lessons here are that people want us to fight harder. They want us to talk about bread and butter issues. I mean, Mamdani talked about, free bus service in New York. He talked about making food more affordable. I mean, a whole bunch of stuff that really impacts everyday people. And so it was a campaign focused on issues that are aimed at improving the quality of life for average people. And he also went out there and campaigned aggressively. And so, I don't know how all this will work out in November, but I think if there's any lessons from this, it's that, you got to go out there and be present. You have to be in the community, and you have to talk about issues that impact regular people.
So there's also a race coming up in Massachusetts next year, and I saw that Senator Elizabeth Warren put out an endorsement of her colleague in the Senate, Ed Markey, who will be running for re-election in 2026. Do you want to see Ed Markey reelected to the Senate?
I do. I mean, what's the alternative? A Republican? I mean,
or another Democrat who might challenge him. You never know.
Yeah. No, look, I think Ed Markey's been a great senator, and he's been present, and I think he's doing a great job. And I'm with Elizabeth Warren on this. I'm with him, and I expect he'll be reelected.
So I want to ask you about one of your committee assignments. You're on the Agriculture Committee. And I found this somewhat ironic. President Trump at one point tweeted that these immigration roundups by ICE, his administration, in the hospitality and agricultural sectors should stop because the jobs would be too tough to replace. And then, of course, a few days later, his administration changed course and picked them back up. But what was your reaction to that development in the immigration saga?
Yeah, no, I think that first of all, I think his whole immigration policy is cruel. I mean, he's breaking up families. He's going after people who have been present in the United States for many years. People who are essential in terms of our workforce. Nobody has a problem with going after criminals, people who are doing bad things in our community. But he's going after people who are actually valued in our community, and I think that's a rotten thing to do. Do we need to fix our immigration laws? Yes, we tried to do that. A year ago, and then Trump weighed in with Republicans and said, "Oh, I don't want you to fix anything because I want to use it as an issue. I want to demagogue this." But this whole view that this administration is putting out there that somehow immigrants are bad or that they're somehow not good for our economy is just wrong. They're wrong. And by the way, we're a nation of immigrants. I mean, we can all trace our family histories back. I mean, very few of us have families that are indigenous to, this land that we're living on right now.
That's the history of the state you represent.
Right. Yeah. And so I'm like, what, this is crazy. And the concern and the terror that's being inflicted on our communities is also problematic. I mean, having masked agents show up armed and, basically taking people off the street, that's stuff that you would expect to see in Russia or China or in a dictatorship. It's not stuff that you would expect to see here. So, as more and more gets known about what Trump is doing, I think more and more people are concerned about ICE and about his policies. Again, nobody, you commit a violent crime, absolutely, you need to be held to account, or sent back to wherever you came from, right? But that's a minuscule number of people, and I have no problem with going after criminals, but I have a problem with going after people who have been here for a long time, who are working and paying taxes, people who are married to U.S. citizens who have children here. That's not who we are.
Now that Elon Musk has left the federal government and we've got a little bit of distance, what have the impacts of Doge been on your district?
They've been horrible. I mean, for example, they've been freezing NIH monies that go to support our teaching hospitals and medical research designed to find cures to diseases that that people suffer from. And that results in uncertainty. That results in people being laid off. That results in scientists saying, oh, maybe I should go to Canada or another country, where I can have more certainty that, in fact, my medical trial will be funded. He's cut back on monies that go to veterans. We've had calls that, the suicide prevention hotline is being answered by an answer machine, not a human being. Layoffs in the VA. We've had layoffs in almost every governmental agency that you can think of. You're reading about the chaos at airports because lack of funding for airport infrastructure, lack of funding for people who actually manage and oversee the airports. We are feeling the impact already. It could get potentially worse depending on whether or not this reconciliation bill passes or what kind of appropriations bills Congress ultimately pass look like. But DOGE is mindless. Trump knows that what they did is illegal, so he's now trying to get Congress to pass rescission bills to actually statutorily cut these programs. But
for funding that's already been allocated. That's already been approved.
And one of the cuts that we did 2 weeks ago was the cut to this program called PEPFAR, which combats HIV/AIDS all around the world. Saved 26 million lives in Africa, and he's cutting it. He's cutting money to deal with, vaccines, for tuberculosis, and cutting back on ways to fight malaria, all this kind of stuff. And the Republicans are saying, well, that's halfway around the world. We can't worry about that. But let me just say this, if you let some of these issues go unchecked halfway around the world, you know what? They end up affecting us halfway down the block. So the idea that somehow we can live in a bubble and not worry about everything else is crazy. We were close to eradicating HIV/AIDS on the continent of Africa and eliminating it permanently. What a great thing. Now we're going in the wrong direction. And the cuts that DOGE has already implemented, which I think are illegal, but nonetheless, as we work through the courts, they're still standing. We're told that conservatively, a couple of 100,000 people have needlessly died as a result of those cuts because we have not provided the services to help treat them or prevent them from getting certain diseases.
Well, at the risk of editorializing, I will make a parochial observation here that the rescission package also included cutting funding that goes to stations like this one through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and supports programs like the latest episode of This American Life, which is heard on WAMC, which did a deep dive into what it looks like in Eswatini in Africa to have the PEPFAR funding suddenly shut off. And it literally is a life or death situation for people who one day were receiving life-saving retroviral medication and the next day were not and didn't really have a great answer for why. So that is worth your listening time.
Right. And cutting monies for public broadcasting is so short-sighted. The Republicans were saying, well, two things. One is we don't like some of the opinions that are aired on, as a result of funding public broadcasting, which is which smacks of censorship. We need to control what is being said and what is being viewed. But the other thing is, then they said, "Oh, we need to cut back to basically balance the budget and save money." Well, here's the deal: the cuts to the Corporation of Public Broadcasting probably add up to like $1.1 billion over the over a 10-year period, and so they cut that, but then they repealed a tax on gun silencers. We had this tax in effect for like decades, and the cost to the American taxpayer of that lost revenue by repealing the tax on gun silencers is $1.5 billion. So, the Assassins Lobby apparently get to the Republicans and get them to do that. But it's like, this is like, really? This is what you're doing? This is crazy. And by the way, their tax cut for billionaires, stays in place. And we're told that this big, ugly bill that's moving its way through Congress is going to add $3.3 trillion to the deficit and the debt. So they're not saving money. They're spending money like drunken sailors, but it's all going to people who are rich and who are well off and who are well connected. All of Trump's big donors are going to benefit from this. The people who are going to get screwed are the people in the middle and the people struggling to get in the middle. And, we need a sea change in terms of what our priorities here. But we want to do everything we can to try to defeat this bill.
Well, we're very grateful to Massachusetts Congressman Jim McGovern, a Democrat from the 2nd District, a mainstay on these airwaves through the years. Thanks for spending this valuable time with us and our listeners, Congressman McGovern.
All the best. Thank you.
All right, that does it for this episode of the WAMC News Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, I'm Ian Pickus.